Hello everybody, welcome to Glass Half Dead, and my first ever time talking about an RPG on this channel, in fact. I'm joined by Will Hungerford above me. Will, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Will. I'm the lead developer at Privateer Press. You probably know us from miniatures games like Warmachine, Monster Apocalypse, Riot Quest, stuff like that. But a lot of people also know us from where we started, which was the Witchfire trilogy, an old third edition D&D series that introduced the Iron Kingdoms to Dungeons and Dragons back in the day. And today I'm here to talk about our newest Kickstarter that went live. We're bringing the Iron Kingdoms to 5th edition with Iron Kingdoms Requiem, which is up on Kickstarter right now until the 11th, whenever you're watching this. And we'll be giving you the skinny on what that means in this episode.
Let's hope so. And also, my fellow Kill Team player, although more importantly for this particular video, longtime D&D player and DM, Deck. Do you want to say hi, Deck?
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Deck. I am avid hobbyist. I've been DMing for just over 2 years now, so by no means an expert. And like most DMs will say, still learning every single day. Your players will always surprise you. Rules will come up you've never heard of before. So yeah, very much a narrative-focused DM. So interested to ask Will a lot of questions about the Kickstarter and what it entails. Do a bit of painting and stuff like that, as how I know Andy. So quick plug, I guess, for my painting Instagram. Which is Swift Paints. So if you're interested, check it out. If you like some Raven Guard, Space Marines, that's the place for you. Very slow progress, though. Quite a shame.
Alright, and if you're interested in either the Kickstarter, which is of course what this entire video is about, or Deck's Instagram, Swift Paints there's going to be links in the description below. But today, of course, we are here to talk about Iron Kingdoms Requiem. Now, whether you're a complete beginner to the Iron Kingdoms or D&D 5th edition, or if you're a seasoned veteran at both, hopefully we'll be able to pique your interest and answer a few questions. Now, I am a self-confessed noob when it comes to any sort of actual mechanics with RPGs, hence we have Deck here to my right to cover my shortfallings there. But conversely, Deck is new to the Iron Kingdoms, so I hope that between us we can form, kind of one competent interviewer, maybe? Plus, luckily, I have a few members of my community that used to play the old version of Iron Kingdoms, whatever that was called as a system, and they've had a few questions that they want me to ask Will as well. So anyway, a big thank you to you both for joining me today, and if you're a subscriber to my channel, then I'd like to give you a big double hello, and if you give a double hello in the next video, along with that weird pirate music sound you just heard. Subscribe now and drop a comment below telling us if you're already familiar with the Iron Kingdoms or if you're new to it. Really interested to see what kind of people this video is bringing in. Anyway, with all that said and done, let's start with the absolute basics. What is Iron Kingdoms Requiem?
So, Iron Kingdoms Requiem, the Kickstarter has 3 books. There's the core book, which is the setting book. It's going to have all the information about the lore, the setting, the nations, major characters, and what the Iron Kingdoms are, which I'll get into in a second. But also that book has new classes, new subclasses, new spells, mechanica, which we can talk about in detail, just a ton of options for players. There's a Monsternomicon, which is basically a monster manual that has 80 new monsters in it, actually over 80 monsters, all unique to the Iron Kingdoms. And then an adventure module. Probably lasts, I'd say, 4 to 6 hours, maybe a 1 to 2 session adventure. And if for $99 or $100 US is how much if you pledge in the Kickstarter, you get all 3. You get physical copies, you get digital copies, and then all the stuff we've unlocked. We're at over 4,000 backers last I checked, so we're going to be providing digital maps for things like Roll20 and other digital platforms, as well as just a bunch of extras, tons of extras. But for people that don't know what Requiem is specifically, who are familiar with Iron Kingdoms, one of the major plot points that just happened through the tabletop game Warmachine is that the Infernals invaded. The Infernals are the demons of the Iron Kingdoms. The reason that humanity knows magic at all in the Iron Kingdoms is one of their gods made a deal with the Infernals to teach them the gift of magic so they could throw off this oppressive race that was enslaving everyone. The deal was, at one point, the Infernals would return and get a whole bunch of humanity's souls. Humanity didn't know about this. So when the Infernals showed back up, it started invading from basically thin air. You had the Infernal War, and Requiem is in the years after the Infernal War, where humanity drove them back we didn't all disappear and get our souls taken. And it's, what does the world look like? How are people rebuilding? What's left of the Infernals? And it's not post-apocalyptic. Like, we made it. We survived. But there are definitely, like, cities that have been ruined here and there, and nations that have had to redraw their borders, old alliances that have broken, new alliances that have been forged. And it shows you don't have to know anything about what has happened over the 20-year history of the Iron Kingdoms. You can come in right now, and we'll get you up to speed and say, okay, this is where we are today, and this is what you're playing in.
Okay, so sorry, just you can jump in immediately. You don't need to know. I assume there's some sort of background lore in this Requiem book. Just jump in.
The first major chapters of the book, as soon as you open, before you read the first rule, is what is the Iron Kingdoms? Not just where we are now, but in general, what makes the Iron Kingdoms unique, which is steam-powered fantasy, like a mix of magic and technology at a very industrial age level. So you're going to have traditional wizards and druids fighting alongside steam jacks and very early locomotive trains and things like that.
Yes, for those that aren't 100% aware of what the Iron Kingdoms is, one of the big nations is called Signar, who are kind of the protagonists, if you is how I've always viewed them. Well, okay, maybe not. But they're in my mind the good guys. At least the guy, that's how I view it, maybe. And they have something called a trencher, and they have trains. So these sorts of things exist. They are fantasy-esque World War One kind of technology level. So they have trains, they have people that fight in trench warfare, but they also have big mechs that will stomp alongside these trenchers, who are called gravediggers, I believe. And yeah, so that's the tech level, if you will. Yeah.
To me, like an iconic Iron Kingdoms thing would be someone wearing armor, traditional like medieval style armor, like full plate, with a gas mask on, their long sword sheath, and then like an old flint pistol. That sort of encapsulates everything. Like, that's the technology that you're going to see blended together, matched with, as you mentioned, steam jacks. The technology, instead of them building tanks, they built bipedal autonomous jacks. They created these magical brains called cortexes that they basically have dog intelligence. You can tell one, go here, guard this, attack that, and they'll understand. And then, as we'll talk about, there's warcasters, a unique class to the Iron Kingdoms, which are people that can connect to them and make them do things they're not supposed to do, like control them and their movements as if they were their own. They sort of jack in psychically and can make these 8-ton metal beasts do whatever the hell they want them to.
Now, very quick question. I'm sure everybody's aware, but Privateer Press does miniatures. Do you actually do a model that is a full plate knight with a gas mask and a pistol? Because I want to buy that now, because you've tempted me there. Maybe that's the next Signar unit.
The closest thing would be the Crucible Guard. The Crucible Guard is a faction of mad scientists and alchemists, and they have some people that are wearing more like heavy leather aprons and like armored leathers, and they have a lot of gas masks and rebreathers and stuff like that.
Okay, fair.
Can hear a lot of Krieg collectors getting excited about all of that description.
Yeah, it's not quite the same. They're more like, I almost say they're like like old diving suits. I suppose they're actually welding masks, aren't they? More than diving suits.
There's both.
But okay, yeah.
There's both. There's some that they look like they're old diving suits. They look like they're from BioShock. Then there's other ones that have more like welding masks and traditional gas masks.
I completely got sidetracked with the model idea there. Sorry. Okay, so that's Iron Kingdoms, and Requiem is now 20 years later. Well, I assume it's a few hundred years later or something in the lore. I don't know, but
the year is, I think, 637 AR, which would put us. It's only 5 years since basically the last major thing that happened in Warmachine. So since the game began, it's maybe like 20 years, 25 years in game time since like the original, if that long. I have to go check my game calendar and look at it.
Bit of a random question. I know that in the game, one of the things you do in the lore is you have named characters, and you can follow their stories. Do they turn up in the RPG?
You have the tools to create them if you wanted to, but we have not made them because a lot of the characters that are in the tabletop are far more powerful than I think a lot of PCs should ever interact with. even very simple ones that might just be a 6-point solo in the tabletop game are actually like demigod level characters in the fluff. And so the idea of a player interacting them, they should interact with them as an NPC in a traditional like narrative sense, a thematic sense. Maybe they're a driving force behind the campaign you're running, but you wouldn't fight the old witch. You wouldn't fight one of the Grimkin, for example. You couldn't. They're just too far above what even a level 20 PC would really want to interact with. And plus, we don't really want to stat them out, because as soon as you stat something out, people are going to try and kill it. They're going to try and find loopholes in it, and it's better to keep them as just things a DM can use if you want to. But we're much more interested in people making their own characters and their own NPCs and telling their own stories.
I feel like I stopped you before you finished actually discussing what the Iron Kingdoms was. Did you have anything more to say? But no, okay.
Look, for anybody who's watched our interviews, this is, I think, our third one. This is how we do. We just, if this is where we were supposed to go on the conversation, we do this the whole way.
Well, it's because I just want to know where I can get the cool models, if I'm honest.
Sure.
So, yeah. Okay. Deck, you know about D&D. So this is something that I don't know about. So you used to have... This is a reboot of the Iron Kingdoms system, which used to work in a different way, and you've ported it over to 5th. Why is the first question, I suppose. And also, kind of, sell it... Like, what's the benefit outside of just it's now compatible with, the absolute monster that 5th edition is in the whole tabletop space?
You kind of answered part of the question right there.
Yeah.
But so we started with 3rd edition. We started with D&D. Then in the middle was the Iron Kingdoms Full Metal Fantasy system, which is a proprietary system we had where it was much closer almost to how Warmachine's combat worked. Ultimately, the decision came that we wanted to get the Iron Kingdoms, as many people as we could. And RPGs are really good for that, for people that don't necessarily play miniatures games. Because there's so many people out there that play RPGs, and we have X number of resources. And so did we want to set those resources towards the system that had been out for a while, that the 2D6 system, the Full Metal Fantasy system? Or did we want to go back to kind of where everything started? We started with D&D. We know the popularity it has. We know the accessibility it has, which is a big deal. Getting that in front of anybody. I mean, basically anybody can play D&D. And so making it 5th ed compatible was a choice, and we just had to decide which way are we going, and ultimately to spread the Iron Kingdoms to as many people as we could and make sure as many people could access it and play it, no matter who they are, their comfortability with playing RPGs. Going the 5th ed route was the stronger route in our opinion.
So, Deck, I don't, I have played one game of D&D that you DM'd. Yeah, there.
Tree the Druid.
I'd forgotten that was what I called him. As you can tell, I'm very original in my D&D naming.
I remember everyone's character sometimes.
That's very good, yeah. I was wondering, so as a DM, and you do, or you are in some way, part of a relatively large group of people that would like to play games. You run, I believe, D&D exclusively, although there are offshoots of people that say, oh, I want to play whatever, and they will go and play their own thing. Do you see like a proprietary system as being almost impossible to get people over to play because it's a whole new rule set, and you actually like the idea of, oh, well, this is basically the same game, it's just different fluff? I'm not saying that's what Requiem is. I don't know. That's just how I view it, I suppose. Or are you like, well, actually, it's the rule system underneath is fine. If we had really wanted to play the other system, people would have done that. They wouldn't have really cared. Like, how do you think that the rules change fits in with the playability and accessibility?
Excuse me. I think it's a really good move, to be honest, because what we experienced setting up that community, because we set it up to attract players that were curious, had never played an RPG before, or had heard about D&D and wanted to play that specifically. So it was all for new players, or maybe even returning veterans that didn't have time to run their own campaigns. 5th edition made that possible. Like Will mentioned, the accessibility of the game now. It is very, very easy for somebody to pick up the player's handbook and make a character. and then you just need to find a DM after that. You know, all the classes are pretty. You know, the D20 system is very easy to pick up. The whole thing is very accessible now. With other game systems having their own proprietary systems, their own different sort of crunch, is completely valid, because when players are first introduced through 5th edition, probably these days, to D&D and the RPG world, they might then get an appetite for different games, you know, playing different game systems, because they're like, oh, I like 5th edition, D&D's great, but I'd like to try something else that's really different. That's only a select few players. Perhaps some players are quite happy, you know, the 5th edition is accessible, they like it, they're quite happy there. I'm one of those people. I tried a different game system, and it was far too crunchy for me, and I didn't enjoy it, because I was like, there is a role for like sneezing in this game. I'm just like, no, this isn't fun. But that was just me, so I just stick with 5th edition. But I think with a game like Requiem, if it's compatible, that's a way for somebody to experience a different world, a different system, without having to learn a whole new rule set. They can just literally, you know, almost ghost into this new world using all the knowledge they already have from 5th edition, which will give them probably comfort and confidence from day one. So I think it sounds like a good idea. Sorry, it was a long-winded answer, but
to add on to what was just said, also, even for people, we designed it so that all the new options available to players, new classes and so on, you can port into your own game. So while not everyone wants the Steam-powered stuff in their game, maybe that doesn't make any sense. Maybe they're playing, you know, like a Conan the Barbarian style fantasy setting, wouldn't have anything like that. There's a lot of material in there that's just new magic, new monsters, new traditional fighting, like martial classes that has no technology attached to it whatsoever. And for someone who's playing 5th ed in their own world, this book will still give them a lot of stuff. And was another major draw of accessibility, is that because everything's so very easily compatible and you can just sort of pick and choose what you want to use, any product you put out for 5th ed has a lot of great value to a wide variety of players, no matter how they use it.
So I'm just literally on the end of that. Well, that's really great to hear, because personally, being a Blizzard fan and gamer, steampunk sort of idea, the mixture of arcane magic and steam-powered, you know, machinery, is something that I really lean towards in my homebrew sort of private campaigns. So, you know, if the work is already done, if you see what I mean, with a source book for all these different amazing creatures and classes that do that, you know, that's a huge appeal. That's really cool.
So how cross compat? I realize that obviously Requiem is entirely its own built thing, but if for example I went down to Deck's local game night and rolled up a standard traditional D&D character, but said, hey, can we fight this crocolisk or whatever, or, you know, this mountain troll or whatever, would you be like, yep, you just take this data sheet and it goes in? Is that how it can work?
It's 100% compatible. I mean, you need the player's handbook, you need the PHB, and if you're running the game, you need the DMG, and you probably want to have your own monster manual. That's the 3 core 5e books. Beyond that, these plug in. Like, you don't have to do any extra work. It's only a matter of if the stuff in these books works in the game your DM is running. You know, for example, if we have a Dracodile or Archons or Witchwoods or Grimkin or Infernals or any of the monsters that are unique to the Iron Kingdoms world, and you want to say, hey, could you, you know, put one of those into your adventure? And they're like, that doesn't really make sense in my world. You know, like all RPGs, it's collaborative. Just like if you wanted to show up with one of the new Paladin oaths, like the Oath of the Wall, that could fit into any fantasy setting. It's very, you know, very flexible in that sense. But at the same time, playing a Storm Knight, which uses Tesla technology, you know, electrical armor and like an electro lance, your DM may not want that in their low fantasy setting. So it's all a conversation of saying, these are my materials. Are you okay with this?
But then immediately to mind, I'm surprised you could tweak the flavor of the, sorry, what was he called? The
Storm Knight?
Storm Knight, yeah, you could tweak him to, instead of it being Tesla electricity, it's, you know, natural thunder or something, you know, and fantasy it up. It's a great thing about 5th edition. You can just flavor, you know, anything on that system, however you like.
Yeah. Does it go the same for classes? For example, if I wanted to play a Warcaster or a Trencher in the D&D, I could just say, hey, here's this character sheet from Requiem. Can I? Yeah. Awesome.
100%.
Okay.
Like I said, as long as every D&D game you ever play is all your DM's approval of what you want to bring. So if someone's like, I'm playing a 4-armed Thrycreen from Dark Sun who has laser pistols, and someone's like, dude, we're playing Conan. Like, no, like,
Sure.
As long as it makes sense for the party and the story.
Okay.
Yeah, and the setting, of course. Like if our community, for example, well, I should really quickly just tell you about it. It's where where I know Andy from, London Wargaming Guild. We have a small branch for D&D now that we set up. Every week, a couple of nights, we have DMs volunteer to run tables of D&D for this community of about 100, nearly 200 people. And it's all done in a setting. So we have like a map, basically a big campaign map.
That's awesome.
And the one shots are just like literally like a 3 or 4 hour adventure that you start and finish in one night. And this story gets built, and your characters are the only thing that stays consistent to you as you go on adventures with different people from the community every single week. On all these different adventures. So yeah, of course, your setting, if it's created by a consortium of DMs as well, it would have to be approved there, obviously, like any homebrew or third party stuff, I suppose. But yeah,
that sounds awesome. By the way, having a world map and you're all playing persistent living characters in this giant world. You basically took an MMO and you took where the idea of MMOs came from, which was doing that with old pen and paper, and then you're bringing it back home to where it started. That's great.
A team of us, 4 or 5 people who started it up, and then we've got like 20 DMs now that help us run it, and yeah, it's great. But the thing is, because it's aimed towards newcomers, casual newbies or whatever, we've got it so there's a limit at sort of level 8. At that point, your character's got to sort of retire, and you can create another one, and that sort of thing. But yeah, we also have something called Epic Tier, where if a DM wants to run like a 3 or 4 session story arc, you can get a group of level 8 retired players, and they can come out of retirement to do like a 3 or 4 session arc and at a higher level sort of thing.
That's
smart. Time,
that's smart, because as soon as they learn teleport, the whole world changes.
Yeah, it's very hard to balance as well, because we try and mix all the players up so no cliques form. Everybody gets to meet different people, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
that gets harder at higher levels.
That sounds great.
Okay, I'm going to jump into a few questions from the community now.
Sure.
This is somebody that had been a big fan, apparently, of the Full Metal Fantasy rule set, and he's wondering how things are going to be affected moving over to 5th edition. And I'm just going to read them verbatim, so I might not know what I'm saying, but hopefully you do. So, the Iron Kingdom setting is one with active war between nations and major story events such as invasions, shifting borders, and causing serious upheavals in the setting. How do you work with that in writing new books? Is there a need to write fuzzy material that can be plugged into any part of the timeline? Or conversely, is there a lot of work put into precisely placing adventure books at specific moments in the bigger story?
So what we've done, I'm not sure exactly what they mean by fuzzy, but Requiem provides you the backdrop of everything he mentioned, the warring nations and where everything stands. We give you adventure hooks, we give you all the tools, and we kind of tell you the different things that are going on in the world so that you can create your own stories. So I'm not 100% sure what they're asking, but my answer would be a lot of time went into making sure that what you knew from Full Metal Fantasy hasn't just been ported over, it's been updated to match the current area of the timeline, presented in the 5e book, and also for new people that never played that system coming on for the first time, making sure that they have a good jumping off point, because we don't want this to just be a sequel and you have to have hundreds of hours of lore in your head. We want you to be able to come in and have never looked at a page of it before and be able to read this. So we're trying to appeal to both the veterans of the setting, so they can be like, oh cool, this changed, and then for new players be like, oh, this is really accessible, I understand what's happening in the world.
Okay.
I hope that answers that question. I'm not sure.
Maybe. I don't know. Okay, on the topic of publishing new versions of material for 5th edition, the original Witchfire trilogy, which is where Privateer Press began, as we said earlier, was written for D20 and feels that way. It includes sections with classic dungeon crawl tempos, where adventurers are expected to resource manage their way through a succession of encounters over the course of a day. This didn't work well if you tried to play it with Privateer's own in-house rule set, because healing was far more limited and a single fight could easily leave people in need of days of rest. The in-house system felt much closer to the presented world, with firearms being lethal weapons and no one could ever feel invulnerable. How do you reconcile the nasty, gritty side of Iron Kingdom's brutal combat with 5th edition's forgiving high fantasy mechanics?
That's a really good question. So for people that don't know, healing magic is not a pleasant thing in the Iron Kingdoms, and resurrection magics are basically forbidden by the gods. There's the world Cain, and then there's the afterlife, Cain. And in the afterlife, when you die, your soul goes to your god, and there's a giant afterlife war going on between the gods. They're using all the souls of their followers as soldiers, and they're having a giant fight. So gods typically do not grant their clerics the ability to resurrect people, because when someone dies, they need their soul. In 5th, this could be very, very punishing. Like they were mentioned in the previous version, healing used to be limited. But we understand, we had to work within the 5e frame of the design. So what we did is magical healing has no limitations in 5e. However, it has thematic and narrative limitations in that when you heal someone, you don't just touch them and the wound closes. Wounds leave scars. A cure light wounds is like fast forward surgery. Like the person feels every knit and every stitch, as does the caster. So the person who gets shot in the arm and you heal it, they're going to have a bullet wound scar there. And then the cleric healing it is going to have mental and physical trauma. They're going to feel as if they had been shot in the arm when they're healing someone. So what we tell is DMs using insanity rules. If you're using those optional rules, this is a good way to integrate them if you want to. Like clerics can only go so far, which is why alchemical potions and alchemy is such a big deal in the setting. As for resurrecting and bringing people back from the dead, we make a big point to say gods don't grant these spells, and we list the spells that bring people back from the dead. And if they do, it's a miracle, and it means that whoever that person is more important alive than they are fighting the eternal war in death. It happens once every few generations. So healing is more accessible than it was in the old systems. But Iron Kingdoms does have a permadeath vibe to it, that when your character dies, unlike a lot of other settings, you can just be like, oh, yeah, Ray's dead. Welcome back, Billy. Let's go try again. In the Iron Kingdoms, death is pretty permanent.
Okay.
Very, it lends itself a lot to a very grimdark sort of D&D adventure, which...
It can be pretty gritty.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah. Now, but again, we left the tool in to say, as the GM, if you want to say, yes, this character is more important alive than they are dead, you have the window there to go, your god grants you Ray's dead today, and only today. So it's not a hard and fast rule, because we have to be careful with those. D&D is very flexible, and you have to give everyone the tools they need to tell the story they want to.
Is there anything where you have actually said, no, 5th edition, don't use this. This doesn't fit the setting at all? Or, well, strongly suggested, aside from those spells?
The death thing would be another good one. Teleportation magic. Teleportation magics don't really exist in the Iron Kingdoms because they attract infernals. And so we give a list of spells that if you use them, there is a percentage chance that an infernal, even though they've been defeated, there's still a lot of them out there, notices your character and may mark you and come for you. So because the Iron Kingdoms is very much built on the idea of traveling via locomotion on trains or by foot, moving armies around, it has to have that sort of old world feeling of I can't just snap my fingers and be somewhere, unless you have structures like the druids of the Circle of Boros have ley line stones that they built in key locations that they can teleport from basically a druid circle to a druid circle, but not just I step out my door and go wherever I want. It helps keep the world wild and adventurous instead of just being able to we have to go to the mountain peak. I'm there. So there are rules that say teleportation is bad. Most people shouldn't even be able to know these magics. Like finding any scroll that has the ways to do it should be a legendary relic. And if you cast it, here's the list of bad things that will probably happen to you. But even then, we still don't just say, no, don't do that.
Okay. Now, I think this is a big one that a lot of people that, of course, know anything about Warmachine are going to be asking about this, which is the Warcaster class. I'll ask his question. This is something I'd wanted to ask myself. I know that you have recently, on the Kickstarter, shown, I assume it's everything, about the Warcaster class and how you build it or run it, I think. But I'll ask, because I couldn't, I just thought, oh, pretty pictures, nice, and I didn't understand it. But
Sure.
how do you create a Warcaster player class within an RPG system that's balanced when compared to the other classes available, but still captures what a Warcaster is within Iron Kingdoms, a powerful magic-using warrior who controls walking machines of war with their mind?
So it's probably one of the hardest design balance gymnastics we had to do. So the book has new classes, which each have their own subclasses. And for those who are new to D&D, subclasses are basically almost every class. When you hit about level 3, sometimes earlier, you pick an archetype that says which way you're going, like what kind of ranger are you, what kind of druid you are, and that specifies new abilities you get that are unique to that subtype you've chosen. We've introduced a ton of new subclasses for the existing classes, new paladins, new monks, new fighters, so on and so forth. But then we also have completely new classes that have their own subclasses, like gun mage, like warcaster. We had to be really careful with warcasters because of how strong they are in the setting. And so we came up with an entirely new magic system that I think provides warcasters a unique place in any 5e party that is unlike other casters. They get focus points. They start with usually 2, and by 5th level they might only have 3 or 4. When they cast a spell, whatever level that spell is how many focus points they spend. So if they have 2 focus points, they cast a first level spell, they spend 1 focus point. Or they could cast another first level spell for 1 focus point. Or they could spend both and cast a second level spell. They can also spend focus points to augment their abilities, give themselves advantage on a melee attack, do more damage on a weapon, things like that. So that seems like a low amount of points versus a wizard at a level can cast multiple spells. But focus points regenerate 1 point every 10 minutes. So what a warcaster does is a warcaster has access to their magic throughout the day versus, say, a wizard who once they cast all their prepared spells, they have to go rest, like have an 8-hour long rest to be ready for the next day. So warcasters are more like the constant magical battery that just takes a second and is always back on, always back on, always back on. And then in addition to that, they can connect to the warjacks, use focus on them, and those warjacks can use focus to gain advantage on attacks and stuff like that. But having a warjack, for people who don't know, they require a ton of coal, they require a ton of water, and they require a lot of gold to maintain. So warcasters can have a warjack, but a warjack definitely becomes a party expense. It's not something that one character is going to be paying for themselves. It's like if we're a bunch of bank robbers and we have a getaway car, the getaway car is kind of all of our responsibility, making sure it's in top shape and it's fully repaired. So this is a getaway car that can shoot a cannon and beat people to death. So we all want to make sure it's working as good as it possibly can. Also, another balancing factor is warjacks are just garbage in dungeons. Have you ever tried to just go spelunking with a tractor? Like, you can't go into a cave with a 12-foot tall, 2-ton thing that's belching smoke and steam behind it. It's probably not going to fit. And it's also going to make a lot of noise. It reminds me a lot of cavaliers in D&D. You can have a cavalier who's amazing on a horse, and a warcaster is amazing with their warjack, but you're not always going to be in a situation where you're on your horse or can use your warjack. But even without their jack, the focus system creates a good balance so that the wizard is more, a traditional wizard is more explosive and could do way more damage in a single encounter because they can cast every spell they prepared for the day. But when that next encounter starts later in the day, the warcaster's recharged and ready to go again.
Now, with saying they recharge a focus every 10 minutes, I suppose this is kind of... How did you find that, like, intuitively within actual play? For example, in the one game of D&D I've played, at no point did Dex say, 15 minutes have passed, therefore you have regained 1 focus. Or do you just kind of, like, does the DM just have to kind of say... All right, well, you had 1 fight, that probably took 5 minutes, and then you looted corpses, that was probably 15, so you've got +2 focus. Or like, how did that work?
It was through a lot of testing and a lot of our own. I mean, I've been DMing for 25 years, and then Matt Getz, who was one of the other developers on it, has been playing for I think longer than I have. As you know, Oz has been playing for a really long time, and you'll have encounters that aren't always in dungeons. You have overland encounters where it's very easy to say you got ambushed or you went and did this thing. You've traveled for a few hours, and you can easily go, "Oh, my Warcaster's recharged." But when you're in a dungeon, that system means sometimes when you're in a dungeon in 5th edition, it's very common for parties to take short rests. 1 hour for everyone to use their hit die and to heal. And this recharge happens automatically. So when you take the short rest, that's 6 focus points back immediately, right? Because you're spending an hour, which is going to be a lot for high-level characters. In the granular situations where it's like, how long has it been? Yeah, you just have to ask your DM. Oh, we've been walking this corridor. How long has it been? It's been 5 minutes. Cool. You just track that. It's very rare that the fighting is so hot and heavy that you're tracking like minute to minute without a single break in the action, because that would just be one giant, never-ending combat. In which case, yeah, that could be a little rough, but we haven't found that actually happen in most games.
Not for 10 minutes anyway.
Right.
That's kind of, the bracket. I mean, a whole round of combat, Andy, from turn 1 to the bottom of the order is 6 seconds of time passing, like in real time in the game. So everyone is, even though you're acting in an order, everyone is narratively moving at the same time. They're all acting on their initiative at the same time in over 6 seconds. Is how to picture it, and that's one round.
So as long as there aren't 100 rounds of combat, you don't have to care.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah. And if there are 100 rounds of combat, you say I'm done playing. And I'm off. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I can't even imagine 100 rounds of combat. Oh.
How long would that even take?
Okay, so that makes sense. A quick side note for myself here: the gun mage, which for whatever reason interests me more than a warcaster. Do they have a different how does their magic system work? Do they just
They have their own spell lists. Like a bard has spells, and certain other classes have spells that aren't dedicated spellcasters. They have a certain amount of spells they get each level. There's a lot of new spells we've introduced just for gun mages, but the main thing they get is when they're using a mage lock pistol, which is a form of mechanica, which we can talk about mechanica, which is a rule system we created for how to build magic items in this setting, like individual parts. But they have a mage lock pistol. They get a certain amount of rune shots a day, and then they have a list of rune shots they know. These could be things like a trick shot where you shoot someone and you not just hit them, but you bounce the bullet off of them into someone else. Or a shot that if you hit metal, it dissolves up to, I think it's like 5 foot by 5 foot cube of metal, so you can shoot the locks off of anything. And it dissolves magical metal too. There's a lot of like utility shots, then just straight offensive shots, like you don't take a disadvantage for shooting at long range, like a snipe shot, things like that. So they get a mix of traditional dex-based DPS character with utility shots that you get so many every day, and then a limited spell list of spells that they can cast that are just generally useful for mages. So I would say they're a hybrid ranged DPS class.
Can they actually do magic outside of their gun?
Yes.
Okay.
They can straight up cast spells. I think like they get obviously a few cantrips. They can cast light and things like that. But then there are unique spells that only gun mages get, and then some traditional spells that a lot of classes get. That detect magic, for example, is something that they can do, and a few other just basic ones. I don't remember if we gave them magic missile or not. I'd have to go look through all the sheets. But there are a few just regular spells, lower level spells they are capable of casting.
So thematically, you could shoot somebody in the head with a magic bullet, and then at the same time cast magic missile at the guy on the other side.
You wouldn't be able to do both in the same action because they're both actions. Unless you built out to do it, which I don't think you can.
Interestingly, at that point anyway, mechanically, Andy, you raise a point. You can't, if you have an action and a bonus action, you can't actually use a spell for both of those anyway. So in that situation, if someone did use their action to, cast magic missile, is there a bonus action shot that they could use? Do the bonus action, do those special shots count as spells, basically?
No, the special shots count as they're written as part of making an attack action with a maze lock pistol. Okay. So
you'd have to use your action unless you had because they don't have a bonus action attack, I would assume. I'm
trying to remember because we've written so many hundreds of pages. If there was if there was a quick shot that let you make it as a bonus attack. I don't
Yeah.
think there was, but I can't remember right now.
No, sure. Well, that's nitty gritty anyway. But
Yes.
Yeah.
it sounds cool. That sounds cool. The gun mage.
Awesome.
One of my favorite spells they have on them, because one thing we introduced with all the firearms in the game, because there's in the equipment section, there's cannons, there's blunderbuss, there's muskets, pistols, so on and so forth. There's a rule on them called magazine, within parentheses, and this is how many bullets each type of weapon holds before you have to spend an action to reload it. You can spend an action or a bonus action to reload it. And then some of them you reload as part of the attack action. There's a new spell for gun mages called Endless Magazine that you can cast on any weapon, and it makes the magazine rule count as infinite as long as they are concentrating on the spell. So that means they can cast it on their gun and just go like bang, 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 and just keep shooting without ever, like, imagine shooting a flintlock pistol that you never reload once. It just keeps firing somehow. It's particularly funny on cannons when you walk up to a cannon and cast Endless Magazine on a cannon, and it just cannonball, 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 and everyone's like, "Who's loading that?" Magic.
It's guns already exist in D&D, right?
In certain settings, I don't think that they
Oh,
don't
okay.
exist in
Not
the
in like.
game.
Oh, okay. Okay. I was going to ask, did you have to like, or have you like enhanced the gun mechanics specifically? But you're saying they didn't exist in the first place, so that's not a valid question. Okay.
In some settings, like, but we did our own spin on a certain abilities. Like we introduced, because we're very gunpowder level of weaponry. We also introduced grenades because it's World War I-ish. There are definitely grenades, and not just regular explosive grenades, but like alchemical grenades. Because alchemist is one of the new classes we introduced. So if you want to play someone who, in the middle of combat, can take out their alchemist kit, grab a couple of vials, swish them together in an empty grenade casing, and create like an acid bomb, and chuck it at people, you can do that. And then there's like rules for how far it splashes and what it does to everyone and that kind of stuff.
Sweet, very artificer style.
Yes.
I love the idea of an alchemist. There's people I know who have actually just reflavored the wizard class to be pretty much an alchemist. Yeah, they've just reflavored all of the spells, descriptions, but they all have the same mechanical effect, basically. But yeah,
that's awesome.
Is that kind of how the alchemist works? Like, if you wanted to, like, is it just okay? It's not just a reflavor. Okay.
No, our alchemist is a totally new class because it doesn't use magic spells at all. Instead, they get formulas they know. There are quick brew formulas you can use as a bonus action where they can just grab something real fast and shake it together and have a one-round effect. These could be like smoke clouds, a little bit of damage, an adhesive sticky tar that you can throw down to stick people on the ground. And then they have formulas where they can prepare different concoctions that they put in vials or grenades or beakers or whatever they want to contain it in. And these are their weapons for the day they want to use. And they decide like, oh, this is one that heals people, so I'm going to make some healing draughts. And I'm also going to make something that lets someone spider climb up a wall. I'm going to make one that when I throw it, you catch on fire. Or I'm going to make a poison that if you drink it, you're going to have to see it, if you start dying. They have a wide variety of formulas they can learn. And their formulas are almost like the kind of spells. Like a wizard knows spells in a spell book. An alchemist knows formulas to create different types of concoctions. But most of the concoctions do kind of unique things. There's no magic missile formula for an alchemist.
So just to, there's a question I've got that's forming, Andy, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
In the Requiem setting, with all of your sort of custom classes, subclasses, the existing 5e classes are there too, aren't they? Because there's obviously there's the fantasy stream of it as well as the steampunk fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, so you could just
and we have
original archetype sort of D&D character in Requiem if you wanted.
You can, and we have new subclasses for a lot of them. New subclasses for traditional fighter. But I mean, I ran a game for the Kickstarter that we put up on YouTube, and our party had an alchemist, a gun mage, a bard fellcaller, bard and fellcaller being a new subclass from Requiem, and then a traditional wizard, just a straight up wizard. But we have new backgrounds that are fit to the setting. So she was part of the Grey Lord Covenant, so new Iron Kingdoms backgrounds. We also have adventuring companies, which are a shared background for all the characters together, where you earn prestige and you unlock tiers of new abilities. For example, Pirate Crew is an adventuring company. So you make your characters and you say, we are a pirate crew. Here's what we get for being a pirate crew. And based on what we do in our games, we gain notoriety or reputation that gives us new things like followers. Like people start showing up to our crew and want to be part of our ship. Or we get letters of marque so that certain nations recognize us in the waters and are cool with us doing whatever we want to. So there's that stuff as well.
Nice.
Random question. Can you have like familiars? Can you have animal pets that follow you around?
Yeah, absolutely.
What?
Druids love that.
Oh, druids, of course. Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? I forgot.
Can you give us an example of like a unique Requiem animal? Is there one?
There's a lot. You go to the Monsternomicon. So one of my favorite is skigs. Skigs are rats that eat gunpowder. And they're CR 1/8, and they're a nuisance. But the problem is, each one, they're big. They're about the size of a beaver. They come in big swarms. Each one can eat a pound of gunpowder until it's full. And they don't do much damage themselves. You're just there. But if you hurt a full skig with something, like if you shoot it or you cast a fire spell at it, they might explode. And they come in big nests and dens. So what will happen is you can have an adventure where there's a warehouse out by the docks, and they're a mechanics workshop. So they have a ton of gunpowder and other grease and stuff in their warehouse. And they have a skig problem. And they're like, we need someone to clear out the skigs, because if the guards show up, they're going to blunder it and just shoot one, and my whole warehouse is going to go up. And you can run an adventure where the whole idea is this adventuring party who's ready to go and has all these badass weapons and spells has to go delicately deal with these giant explosive rats. And I think that makes a hilarious and terrible familiar that you could have with you.
Yeah. Fantastic.
That'd be fun.
Like it.
Yeah. If you shoot my familiar, it's gonna blow my leg off.
It's gonna...
Yeah. We're all going down.
Yeah. Okay. The Iron Kingdoms RPG has a history and a back catalogue of beautifully sculpted character models, which helped a lot to really establish the aesthetic of the game setting and really set it apart from the staple high fantasy competition. Is there any plan for a revival of RPG-specific models? Would such a range be able to compete with the relatively low-cost ranges for similar games like D&D?
I wouldn't expect... We did the IK RPG miniatures way before Warmachine had become a thing, and then continuing on through the early days of Warmachine. At this point, there's over 2,000 Warmachine models. Warmachine and Hordes models. So that is really your RPG range. People can go to the online store, store.privateerpress.com, and pick and choose. You can find characters from Warmachine that represent every kind of NPC and PC you might want to play. Like if you want to play a Witch Hunter of the Order of Illumination, grab Harlan Versh. You want to play a Gun Mage, grab Kane. Everything you need, including the monsters. When you look at things from Crix or the Hordes factions, it's all there. Now, obviously, there's going to be monsters we've introduced in the Monsternomicon that we never made miniatures for. Sometimes they're too big, or sometimes they're too weird. So not everything will have a miniature, but as they mentioned, right now with the market, you can buy pre-assembled, pre-primed miniatures, 2 of them for like $4, right? And we're not going to be competing with that. We're just going to have our main, the metal, resin, plastic miniatures we do, and we think there's a lot of stuff for people to use out of those.
We might just add on to it as well. 5th edition being a massive move away from the need to really have miniatures as well. It gives you a lot more capability with Theatre of the Mind, which is something I found brought a lot more people to it. The idea they didn't have to have a miniature or a set of miniatures and have a nice table, everything you need is in the mind and in the game mechanics, basically, as well. So, but if you do want to make something, use an old model, convert it.
You have the tools, right? They're all there.
Talking about that, for the Kickstarter, you are doing stretch goals, which are these printed out, tiled battle mats, aren't you?
We are, and I think they will be available digitally as well, if I'm not mistaken. And we know there are a lot of people that use maps, whether physically or digitally. Even if they don't use miniatures, I've run games where people didn't play miniatures, but we had a map out that wasn't even gridded 5x5. It was simply a point of reference, so we could just simply be like, you're in this area, you're hiding in these trees over here, because some players need that. They will get lost if too much happening, if there's too many players doing things. And as you get higher level, where people start to get movement tricks and can dimension door 500 feet away and stuff like that, it's useful to have that to track. So yeah, we're providing the gridded maps for people that want to use them, as well as digital tokens for playing online.
Nice.
Awesome.
You can just use dice at the end of the day. I've played many a game where we just use dice to represent who everyone is, and the number on the top of the dice. You're number 1, you're number 2, kind of thing.
Okay, well, let's not
Whatever
let
you need to
Warmachine players know about this. Let's not. Jesus. Let's not tell them that. Okay, crafting. This is the final one from the community member here. Crafting items was a big part of previous versions of Iron Kingdoms. 5th Ed doesn't really have a lot of support for that kind of thing. Will it still be a big part of the new edition? And of course, you had mentioned earlier mechanica being a thing.
Yeah.
So
there's a big section on mechanica, and steam jacks are a section of that, of building your own steam jacks and equipping them. But mechanica, we have an entire system. So what mechanica is mechanica is the main technology that has created this whole steam-powered fantasy. It is a blend of magic and regular technology. Every piece of mechanica has 3 things: housing, a rune plate, and a capacitor. Housing is what the thing is. Is it a sword? Is it a scope, like a rifle scope? Is it, an engine? Whatever the housing is, just it is. Rune plates are what they sound like. They are plates that runes get inscribed on that do different magical things. Each rune plate, there's different rune plates. They have a different cost. They say how many runes can be inscribed on them until they're done. And those get put in the housing of whatever the item is. So for example, say that your housing is a sword, a mechanica sword. Those are pretty common. And you have a rune plate that says it's the rune plate of Balefire, that when you activate it, the sword is going to begin emitting a radiant fire that does extra damage to undead and otherworldly creatures. And then the capacitor is basically how long can you have this item activated before the capacitor burns out and you need to spend money to get it replaced. It's the battery, for lack of a better term. This can be things like a little miniature alchemical vial that plugs into the rune plate. There's a lot of different ones. There's coiled up ones that provide energy and can be recharged longer or easier. There's an entire chapter dedicated to just the options and how you build these things. So there will be a ton of crafting of mechanica of whatever kind you want. You want to have a scope on your rifle that lets you have true sight and see invisible things? That's a thing you can build. Do you want to have mechanica boots that let you walk up vertical things? You're going to have options for that. A lot of them go into weapons and guns because the reason this technology exists is it was brought about by the warfare of the nations. So a lot of rune plates are dedicated to war. So you're going to have things that just make your guns, your armor and your swords do different stuff. But you could have a mechanica club if you wanted to. If you just wanted to take a club and put a rune plate in it and say, I put a rune plate of freezing in it so that when I hit people, it does, cold damage and maybe slows them down. It's a thing you can do. You can get as weird as you want.
Okay. When it comes to the book itself, Requiem, is there enough information in there for example, I mean, the Iron Kingdoms is pretty large, isn't it? You've got Ord, Liaise. It's not pronounced Liaise, is it? Laise? Leo.
Lael.
Signar, all of these different places. How in depth does the book go for, let's say, a new player who just wants to grab Requiem and say, I'm going to start doing this, and some guy comes along, or girl, and says, hey, my guy's from Ord. How do I act? And he's going to say, well, let me find out.
We have new races, new classes. There's a lot of stuff, but there's also room for expansion. We could not cover everything in the world in one book. That book would be this thick. Like, it's impossible. And plus, it's good to have room to expand. But we hit all the major stuff. If you want to play a Rulic Dwarf, if you want to play a human, we have rules for the humans from every single major nation. If you want to be an Iozan, a Nis Elf, all that stuff's there, then all the different classes. Then we also created a lot of things that give you the tools to build what you might have seen in Warmachine that there aren't already pre-built rules for. Like the Mechanica system lets you build weapons that you might have seen that we don't already give you the template for. We also have a new character creation method called Essence, where if you don't want to use the racial traits, if you're like, I'm an elf, and it says, all elves get +2 dex, if you're like, I don't want to do that, you can forego your racial traits. And the Essence system are words like mighty, intellectual, pious. and you go, I am a mighty character. My race doesn't matter. And you get the mighty stats instead, or the pious stats, or intellectual. So if you're like, I want to be a mighty gobber, or I want to be a piousness elf, you can use that system instead of the standard racial benefit system. And with stuff like that, we've given these tools to everyone. So even if we don't give you the exact rules for what a thing should be, because we might cover it in a supplement later, you have the tools to still make that thing. At least until we give you an updated version later. Also, we covered the races in D&D that don't appear in the IK. Tieflings, Dragonborn, Halflings. There's none of those in Iron Kingdoms. But, for example, we have the Satixis of Crix. Those are the very Amazonian race of women that have the horns, that the reason they're blighted, a dragon got killed over their island many years ago. Its blood splattered across their island, and it corrupted all of them permanently. And as a race, as a species, they transformed. So we basically said, if you'd like to play a Tiefling, play a Satixis. And here are new Tiefling rules. So use Tiefling and use these rules and make a Satixis instead.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay.
So it's based on the Tiefling race rather than... Yeah, that's cool.
But yeah, to answer his question, all that stuff exists so that whatever they see they want to make, even if we don't spell it out for you 100%, you have the building blocks to very easily make it, even as a new player. We even kind of point it out and say, just do this, this, and this, and you're there.
Can I play anything from the tabletop? So, if I wanted to be a member of Crix, okay. I feel like
absolutely.
I should have asked a better question there. I mean, like, you know, Crix is very warped. They have a lot of skeletons, undead, etc. Can I play an undead?
That's up to your GM's discretion.
Oh, okay,
but
right, yeah.
for Dragonborn from regular 5th edition, we said use Dragonborn to represent people that have been blighted by the dragons and are heavily mutated, which a lot of the Crixian mortals are. They live under the shadow of Torok. They are all mutants and weirdos. There's also just humans that live out on the Shard Isles and the Satixis. So if you want to play Crixian, Crix isn't just the undead. There's entire human settlements and human elements to it, like the pirate fleets they have, like the Satixis, and like these blighted individuals. So we don't give you rules to play an undead, because most of the undead are mindless, and so I don't think that would necessarily be the most fun. But we give you rules. If you want to play a Crixian campaign where all villains and your whole game is you're going out raiding the coast, you have everything you need.
Can you be an Ogryn?
Yes, that's one of the base races we give you new rules for. The new races we did Rulik Dwarf, Ogryn, Gobber, Iozan Elf, Nissian Elf, and then a ton of different human types.
Okay, awesome.
I feel like I'm missing one. Oh, Trollkin. Sorry. Yeah, Trollkin.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I was like, I'm missing a big one. What is it? It's like, yeah, trolls.
Who, in the Iron Kingdoms, the Trollkin are... You know how Signar are the good guys for Warmachine? I always think of Trollkin as being the good guys for Hordes. Even though I know it's not quite that. Yeah. Although they
Trollkin are probably the good guys in the setting.
Are they? Okay. All right.
Yeah, they were trying to find a home, and all these warring nations kept kicking them out of everyone. I mean, one of their members, Doomshaper, went a little crazy and did derail a medical train, and kill everybody inside it. But aside from him, he's a bad egg.
Oh, okay. All right.
All the rest of them are just trying to find a place to live, and everyone keeps blowing everything up.
Okay. Here's, I guess, like a big question that arguably should have been asked earlier at the beginning. But why play Requiem instead of just base D&D? Is it just so that you can play in the Iron Kingdoms? Or is there actually, like, a reason, if you see what I mean?
I think that there's a lot of reasons. If you're a fan of the Iron Kingdoms or the world or this type of adventure, if this sort of like high fantasy pulp steam-powered thing appeals to you, this is a great world to jump into. Also, if you want more options to do things in your regular D&D game, if you want to use some of these new subclasses, if you want to use mechanica and ask your GM, hey, can we use mechanica as like more magical items, magical artifacts, instead of like, you know, the technological side this is? Even if you're playing, you know, Dark Sun or an old school like setting, there's stuff here for you. So I think the reason to play Requiem is it's a big answer. Either you're attracted to the world or something from the world you think is cool and you would like to port into your world. And we think we've got a lot of that kind of stuff.
So, for example, if somebody in Deck's campaign said, "Hey, I just want to make magical guns," he can just say, "Okay, well, here's the mechanica list, here's the weapon list,
Yes.
go crazy." And that's
we could, but don't you put ideas in those
oh,
players'
okay.
heads.
Yeah. Yeah.
For my homebrew, though, you know, more than excited for the idea of that. It does sound very cool. I'm a big steampunk fan, and yeah, everything described so far just sounds very thorough and very cool. Like lots to sink your teeth into.
Yeah, I mean, I'm that weird one. I obviously like as soon as it released, I got the early bird Kickstarter thing. I got all 3 books. Just because I think you guys do cool artwork.
Thank you.
There you go. That was the whole purpose of buying it. I just want to look at the pretty pictures in the book. Yeah.
The Monsternomicon will be good for you then.
Yes.
That's a book I also think a lot of DMs are going to use regardless of their setting. I think one of the highest value source books you can buy for any game is monster manuals of some kind, because you're going to find stuff there that you can bring into your world, and every monster it can be an idea, and every monster can be in its own adventure. And the Monsternomicon, there'll be a list of monsters. You'll be like, okay, these are very IK specific. They don't really make sense here. I'm not going to use those. But even if you did that, you're still going to have like over 60 monsters that you could literally drop into any setting.
Nice.
The Dracodile, a dragon-sized crocodile that breathes poisonous breath, like that goes anywhere.
It just makes sense. Yeah. Okay, awesome. I kind of don't have any more questions. Deck, if you have any questions, please ask.
I have a few kind of self-indulgent as a D&D player, I suppose, like questions I'd like to ask Will. So what were your inspirations like behind this stuff? What's your sort of gaming history, you guys? Are you I know you said that you played D&D for a long time. But are there other sort of settings that you guys play a lot of, or you get inspiration from any other sort of...
Yes, I play a lot. I've been a nerd since I was little. I mean, since I was 10 years old. Grew up on Star Wars, grew up on Lord of the Rings. I think a lot of the traditional inspirations that a lot of us have these days. I also get a lot of inspiration from a pretty weird source. I am a huge horror fan. I enjoy Silent Hill. It's like one of my favorite video game series and things like that. And I will, because we've got the traditional monsters, Gatorman and Pharaoh and stuff like that. But then we have like the Cephalics, which are this weird underground race of surgeons that steal people and pull their brains out and turn them into drudges that have and then they pump them full of chemicals to make them like Bane strong. So sometimes it gets really dark. And I would say my inspirations are traditional fantasy and sci-fi that I think we all know, horror, especially fantasy horror, and then I've just played a lot of games over the years. I mean, I remember playing old school Ultima and Pools of Radiance on PC like back in the 80s. I've just been messing with this stuff forever, so it's this weird mishmash of a lot of different things. I also have to be careful because I read a lot of China Miéville, and he can get really weird sometimes, and sometimes I'll be working on something and I realize I'm getting too weird with it and need to bring it back down to where people are going to be like, to where it's recognizable, and people will be like, wait a second, you're getting too like out there with this concept.
Fair play. Yeah, that's cool. And the last thing I really wanted to ask was, it sounds pretty easy to play, but for somebody who's even new to D&D, if they were to get the player's handbook and then the Requiem book,
Yes.
how easy would it be for somebody to sort of, you know, start a game in the IK setting, completely fresh to D&D as well?
Super easy. I would say the one thing that's a little bit advanced is the mechanica system, because it is a build your own item, and those are always, to make them feel robust and fleshed out, they have to have some meat behind them. So figuring out like your capacitor and how much power it puts out and what that does for your rune plates is a little bit of extra work. It is a little bit of crunch. But not so much that I think, you know, someone couldn't get it for, you know, a younger audience, maybe a younger child playing D&D. I'd say maybe stay away from that stuff. But just, I grab the PHB, I grab Requiem, I go, I'm playing a monk. Oh, cool. I'm going to take the Way of Deception subclass from Requiem, use that on my monk. Here's some equipment from Requiem. Here's some equipment for the PHB. I'm good to go.
Cool. So Requiem, I'm imagining right now, is almost like a D&D source book almost. You know,
It's a campaign book.
You would use it in the same way, sort of thing. Perfect.
Yep.
So would people see the familiar, obviously not art and things like that, but the tables, the familiar, modifier stats, and the layout, I suppose, the way it tells you about your character, that kind of thing.
I think anyone who has read any of the books or other source books that have come from multiple sources, like this is going to flow to your eyes very, very. We've been working with the graphic designer a lot on making sure that it seemed familiar, that when you opened it, it didn't look like way out there. Like it's going to feel right, and it's going to read right.
Cool.
Yeah.
They're just some things that, D&D, as a D&D player, I definitely would want to ask you. So that's fine. Thank you, Will. Awesome.
Yeah, no problem. I totally feel you on that question. When I'm flipping through a PDF online or something, like if I'm using a source book from another material where they went a little different with things, it's visually jarring sometimes, and it throws you off, and you're sort of like, wait, where am I at? So yeah.
Awesome. And I suppose, did you have any kind of final thoughts you wanted to, perhaps we forgot to ask you a specific question or something, Will?
I would just say, for anyone interested, I wouldn't, for the things that we've talked about in this, I haven't even covered everything in the book, because any big RPG book of, multiple hundred pages, there's a lot of material in there. So if there's something that you're like, hey, is this in the book, and you're not sure, go to the Kickstarter right now and go to the comment section. Both the owner of our company, Matt Wilson, as well as our Kickstarter producer, Andy Gill, are in there answering people's questions constantly. And then the ones that are rules related, they're sending to me, and then I'm sending them the answer to post in there. So if there's something that you watch this and you want to know more about, go check out the Kickstarter page. And if they don't have the answer on the page, go ask in the comments, and you'll probably get your answer pretty quick.
Cool. And I suppose, something, again, probably should have asked earlier, what was your actual, I just said at the beginning that you were co-developer of this. How much of a role did you actually take? Were you specifically on the crunch? As you said, they're sending you the rules questions, or? So
there were three of us doing game development on this. Myself, Matt Getz, and William Schoonover did all the game development on it. And we each had our own sections. I wrote about 60 of the monsters in the Monsternomicon, and then a massive chunk of the subclass sections. So a lot of subclasses, but we all work together. So where like Matt Getz might have, I think it was Matt Getz did the Warcaster class. We would send it to Oz and I. We would give our input, and we would review. So we each were our own generators of content, and then it went to the group, got circulated, came back, revisions were made. Then it went to playtest. Playtesters got it back to us with notes, revisions were made, and then it finally went to editing. So that was my part. I did a lot of monsters, and I did a lot of class work. I didn't do as much equipment work on this one, like the mechanica section. I didn't say the ice rune plate does this. That was someone else, but I was part of the process that made sure it all worked.
Now, Matt Wilson is the founder of Privacy Press, is that right?
Yeah, he's one of the founders and chief creative officer, I think, is his current title.
Okay, sure. Well, when you're the founder, you can just call yourself whatever, can't you?
Yeah.
But so I assume that he founded it, as you said, with the Witchfire trilogy, right?
Yeah, Witchfire, if I'm not mistaken, was the first thing that ever came out of Privateer Press officially. And I know Warmachine was definitely after, because Warmachine, they were handing out Butcher models at Gen Con 2003, and that was before Warmachine had even been released as a game. They were showing the miniature to be like, this is coming.
Right.
And Witchfire was right before that.
Okay. I would have assumed, obviously you can only guess perhaps, but that was the first thing he did. I assume he had a large hand in creating Witchfire. Did he not? Oh, yeah. Did he not want to be one of the ground crew for Requiem? Like the
he has oversight over all the fluff and the narrative aspect of everything that's happening. But in terms of game development, I mean, we've got so many different games. Matt can't have his hands on every single thing at once. But in terms of everything we do gets okayed by Matt. So when I pitch him a new model for Warmachine, or if I pitch an idea like, oh, I think we should do this class in Iron Kingdoms and stuff like that, Matt has like okay on all of it. The implementation and execution of it is up to us, basically. And then when it came to the big narrative beats, like what's going on in the world. What does the Iron Kingdoms look like in Requiem? Matt and Jason sat down and sort of figured out those beats, and then those beats get handed off to writers and say, okay, this is what happened. Here's the plot. Fill it in. So he's definitely still involved in a major capacity. Just I wouldn't say like not always at the granular capacity. Like Matt wouldn't tell me that this monk subclass needs to have a proficiency bonus in stealth. Like that's not words that are going to come out of his mouth. It's just more like me saying, "Hey Matt, I want to make a monk that can steal people's memories and like is a monk spy," and him being like, "Cool, do that," or "No, that doesn't make any sense."
Yeah. Okay. And of course, the next model you're going to pitch him is full plate knight, gas mask, flintlock pistol. Right?
We'll have to now, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm wanting it. Okay, awesome. I suppose, and a final question, which is completely out of left field here. Warmachine tactics. Do you have any plans to ever do any sort of PC game again? Not like that, but just any sort of Warmachine game again?
I am the wrong person to ask.
That's fair enough.
That because I am purely on game design and development. So when it comes to stuff like working with an outside software developer to create a video game, that I'm very separated from that sort of business decision. So I have no idea. For all I know, there's one coming out tomorrow on the App Store.
Sure,
but I don't.
Probably
think so.
not. Probably not. But yeah,
probably not.
Okay, fair enough. I was just playing it the other day, and I was like, "This is fun." Anyway, there you go. What can you do? All right, well, brilliant. Thank you very much, guys, for coming along. This has been really good. Obviously, go to the Kickstarter page. If that wasn't clear, that's what this has all been talking about. I will say, so I don't really have a feeling for D&D and RPGs in general and how much they generally get funded. But I feel like Requiem's done really well. Or is this kind of what you expected? Or like it's gone higher than I thought it would?
It's going well, and we're very happy. Let's see. Right now, at the time of recording, we're at 4,316 backers and right at $400,000. You can't complain about that. That's great. That's phenomenal. Yeah. I personally am careful to never expect anything, because that's how you get your heart broken. If we put all this work into it and then everyone's just kind of like, we don't want it. So, we knew what our funding goals were and how much money we needed for this to be profitable and to get made. As long as it funded, ultimately, I was happy. As long as the work we did made it out there, that's what I cared about. So everything that we've made it above that funding goal has just been extra happiness layered on top of it. I'd have only been unhappy if we hadn't funded, which I'd have been like, what did we do wrong? Like, how did that happen?
Well, I mean, obviously I paid a lot of attention to the Warcaster Kickstarter, and you're almost, it looks like you might hit the same, if not more, or at least you're very close to what Warcaster kickstarted at, which for me seems crazy. Like a whole new miniature line in game is rivaled by, I'm going to sound very trivializing here, a couple of books. Well,
also Warcaster backed at 2,300 backers. We got 2,330 backers on Warcaster. So
but they were spending more.
Yes, because it had a higher buy-in. Yeah. So we don't just look at the money. I mean, obviously that's important, but we look at the number of backers. Right now, our most backed physical tabletop project by far is Requiem.
Right.
There's a lot of 5e players out there, and a lot of people that want to play around in the Iron Kingdoms.
And lockdown, it's been one of the things that's brought a lot of people to the game as well. Big time. So when Will was talking about digital tokens and everything and stretch goals and things like that, that's all just money. Stars on the eyes. Like that sounds cool.
I'm so happy for digital gaming. It's been so good for my mental well-being of just being like, as you can tell, I haven't gotten a haircut in I don't know how long.
So I'm wearing a hat, mate.
Yeah. It's just being able to connect with people, because I'm an extrovert. I need that. And being able to get online and play role-playing games with people has been a lifesaver.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And being able to even have, the 3D dice fly across the screen in front of everyone on a virtual tabletop, and all just react on camera. It's needed.
Do you have any feel for like how many of these people are completely new to privateer press, Like, I don't know how you figure that out, but do you know if like, oh yeah, well,
Yeah.
1,000 of these have never heard of us before, they just like fifth?
That's really hard to know. You can only really tell from a few comments. There'll be, I'm sure, like surveys as part of the backer kit, but I don't think we have a good feel for that right now. And it's because the company's been around for 20 years and we've made so many different types of games. It's hard to be like. There are many people who don't know who we are, and there's many people that we wouldn't have expected to know who we are who do know who we are, and so it's super hard to gauge.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I didn't come to role-playing games at all, or D&D at all until 5th edition. I've not played any other. So, you know, I'd not heard of Iron Kingdoms at all before this either, but now knowing that there's one that's 5e compatible, you know, I'm going to the Kickstarter myself in a minute.
Awesome. Thank you.
We've made one sale. There you go. It's all worthwhile. There you go.
Worth it.
All right, well, thank you very much for coming along, Will. I'm really excited for it, even if it just means I get to read a bunch of the fluffy background and look at some cool pictures and then just be confused by a few numbers, mainly.
Well,
and Deck, thank you very much for coming along to provide at least somebody that's played the 5th edition before, so that I wasn't completely lost in this. Moral support, at least, yeah.
There you are, mate.
Yeah.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, mate. Thanks for inviting me.
Brilliant. Yeah, so check out the Kickstarter and also, of course, Deck's Instagram page. Links to both will be below. Final question. Do we have any idea when it might hit retail for those that, for whatever reason, missed the Kickstarter?
I think it's trying to get out in September, if I'm not mistaken. So I would say this year for certain. But I think it should be end of Q3. But obviously, there's still a pandemic, so it is very hard to say anything with certainty in terms of shipping times and when stuff gets out there, especially when we're working with print books and making physical copies that have to get printed. So fingers crossed, September.
Okay. That's awesome. Now, for those of you that aren't aware, the way I finish my videos, because essentially, thanks to the YouTube algorithm, nobody makes it to the end of a video. 8% of viewers make it to the end of a video. So what I like to do is I like to give them a triple hello. But because there are 3 of us on here, shall we try this? I'll say hello, then Will says hello, and then Deck says hello. And that will be their triple hello, okay? Hello!
Hello.
Hello.
That's your triple hello. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you've had a good day. I hope you continue to have a good day. Thank you, both of you, for being here. And goodbye.